Hello, I'm Brendan Riley from Rattlebox Games. Today I'm bringing you a video that has nothing to do with Rattlebox Games. Today I'd like to teach you how to play A Handful of Stars by Martin Wallace. I'm making this video a little bit to practice making videos, so apologies if it's not great, but also because when I went to learn this game, there were no videos teaching me how to play it, and I struggled a little bit, so I wanted to make a video, honestly mostly to teach myself for next time I want to play, but I thought you might like to learn too. So let's get started. To begin with, give each player their colony discs, cubes, homeworld disc, the space bases, the fleets, and their 4 starting cards. Each player should put their homeworld marker and colony discs at the top of their player board and put the remaining in an available stock. Next, you're going to shuffle the system tiles and randomly distribute those around the board. Each system tile is either inhabitable or uninhabitable. Inhabitable tiles are green and they have a population symbol in the upper left corner, a defense symbol in the upper right corner. The uninhabitable planets are red, and they will sometimes have a energy symbol in the upper left, a matter symbol in the upper right. Either kind of planet can have a black hole symbol, which is in the lower right, and it looks like a Greek letter. For each planet that has a black hole symbol, take one of the black hole discs and place it on the planet. Once you've placed all the black hole discs, you should have one left that's not on the board. After that, you go through the planets and for each one you look and see if the Greek letter is next to the planet. If it is, you slide the black hole marker off the planet onto that letter. It's possible that you could end up with some markers not on the board. If you have, say, 2 planets trying to put a marker on the same space, anytime you can't place the marker, just remove the black hole marker from the game. When you're done, you'll have a network of planets, some of which are blocked off by black holes. Next, deal habitable system cards to the players. The rulebook indicates how many cards each person gets. It goes 5 cards for a 2-player game, 4 cards for a 3-player game, or 3 cards for a 4-player game. And then you do the same with the uninhabitable system. Again, in a 2-player game you get 5 cards and so on. Each player should then place one of their outposts, the cubes, on each planet they control. I'm setting up the board for a 2-player game between red and blue, so you'll see both red and blue cubes on the board. Next, you're going to shuffle the technology cards and deal 2 of those to each player. Next, deal 1 race identity card to each player, which players then reveal, and then they take the corresponding race ability cards. There's 3 per race, and you can identify them using the names which are on the race identity card, or using the symbol which matches between the card. Each player now chooses a homeworld. They do so by picking the card secretly, and everyone reveals at the same time. You place your homeworld marker, 2 fleets, and a starbase on that world. Remember that it needs to be an inhabitable world, and you need to remove the outpost when you put it there. Everyone does the same thing again with the colonies. Everyone chooses a colony secretly, reveals it, and then places a colony marker from their player board onto the board, removing the outpost marker. They then place 1 starbase and 1 fleet. Each player then puts 1 fleet on each of the other systems where they have an outpost. Then you determine the first player in the order of your choosing. I suggest the player who most recently went to space. Then you shuffle the development counters and put them on display. There should be 6 on display when you begin. The first player chooses a development counter, then you replace it. The second player chooses a development counter, and you replace it, and so on. You go around until everyone has taken 2 counters. Those go on your player board in the spaces vacated by the homeworld marker and colony. You should have 4 colony tokens available and 7 tokens on your player board. You should take the two of your 4 remaining colony tokens and place those on the score track at the top of the board. In a 2-player game, each player should start with 36 victory points. A 3-player game has 30, and a 4-player game has 24. In A Handful of Stars, all victory points are trackable at any time. So the victory point tracker at the top is there for ease of use while you're playing. At the end of the game, everyone should recalculate just in case anything was missed. Shuffle and put 8 technology cards on display. If the Wormhole card is drawn, put it to the side and draw another one. The Wormhole card is a special technology I'll explain at the end. Now shuffle the alien counters and place 1 face down on each unoccupied inhabitable planet. These are the ones with the alien markers. These should be placed face down and random so you don't know what they are. You should have 2 or 3 large black hole markers. Place 2 of them on the defense and attack track and 1 of them on the shuffle track at the 0 space. Now everyone should shuffle their 4 starting cards, 3 race ability cards, 2 technology cards, and their system cards together to form their draw deck. Draw 6 cards to form your hand, and you're ready to begin. I've set up for a 2-player game, And I'm going to talk you through a little bit about how the game works, so by the time we're done, you'll be able to play A Handful of Stars with your friends. In A Handful of Stars, you are an alien race trying to conquer the galaxy. It is kind of a 4X game, except there's not very much exploration because the whole place is already figured out when you start. The only thing you don't know is how dangerous the aliens are on the uninhabited planets. Its main mechanisms are area control and deck building. It comes from the same series of games as A Few Acres of Snow and Mythotopia, so if you've played either of those games, it will seem sort of familiar. When you play A Handful of Stars, your goal is to take over as much of the galaxy as you can. The end of game sequence is triggered by the shuffle track over here on the right side of the board. At the end of the game, your non-military units that are on the board, your outposts, which are these cubes, your colonies, which are these discs, and your homeworld, which is this big fat disc, those are the things that are going to get you points. You also can earn points for development counters with point tokens on them, that's these guys, and for cards that have point tokens on them like this, but only if these are in your reserve at the end of the game. The tiebreaker for the game, however, is the person who controls the most systems. If you've played deck builders before, you probably have some ideas about how games should work, and this game works a little bit different in a couple ways. In a lot of deck builders, when you have multiple icons on a card like this one, which has 4 icons on it, you are going to get 4 pieces of resource. In A Handful of Stars, you are never going to get more than 1. Whenever you see more than 1 icon, or say an icon and an action, you only get to pick 1. You only ever play a card for 1 thing. So that's the first thing. Second difference between this and many deck builders is that you only get 2 actions per turn. This is not the kind of game where you can make a huge string of actions and have them go all at once, except there are a few cards that say free action, and you can play those. The third difference is a lot of deck builders, you're going to discard your hand at the end. In A Handful of Stars, you do not. At the end of the turn, you'll draw back up to your hand size, but however many cards you still have in your hand are still in your hand. And then the fourth difference is that cards go right into the discard pile when you play them. A lot of deck builders have a play area, and then cards don't go in until the end of the turn. In this game, they go in right away when you play them. So that's the differences between this deck builder and others. Let's jump into the game. On the board, we have a number of planets. You have controlled versus uncontrolled first. Controlled means someone has a unit there in between actions. Now you can have a planet be controlled during an action, but the combat gets in the way of that. But generally, if you have a unit there, you control the planet, even if you haven't built anything. You can have inhabitable and uninhabitable planets. You may never build a colony or your homeworld on an uninhabitable planet, except if a card tells you can. The only thing you can build on an uninhabitable planet are outposts, the cubes. There are a variety of card types in the game. So you have your alien cards. Those are going to have a little icon in the corner. You have your player cards, which are going to have the cover art on them, and they'll be tinged in your color. You have technology cards, which come in a couple different flavors. There's a free action. Free action card means you can play it without using up one of your actions, and you do what it says on the card. You have action cards. Use that as one of your actions instead of one of the other things you might do. You have system cards, which do not have any actions on them, but they do have resources they give you. So for instance, this is the farthest system, and I could use it to get 2 movement. Some cards in the middle here will say reserve. You can use this card at any time for the resource in the top, just like any other cards. But if you want to use it for the skill it provides in the reserve, you have to put it on your player board in your reserve. We'll talk about what that means in a bit, but I want to be sure everybody understands. A reserve card has to go in your reserve to provide that power. On your turn, you are going to take 2 actions. You're going to adjust the point track, then you're going to draw back up to 6 cards. If you ever have to draw and you can't, that's when you're going to shuffle. You collect your discard pile, shuffle it up, put it down in your draw deck, and then continue drawing until you have your 6 cards. Each time you shuffle, you also need to adjust the shuffle track over here on the right side of the board. You just slide the marker up 1 space. The game end sequence triggers when that marker reaches the highlighted space on that track given the number of players you have. For instance, if you have 2 players, after 14 shuffles, regardless of who does the shuffling, once it hits 14, then you're going to do the end of game sequence. The end of game sequence is pretty simple. You finish the round you're on, so everybody who's going after first player finishes, and then everyone gets one more turn. Also, on your player board, you're going to have these development counters, which might be flipped upside down. When you shuffle, you get to flip them right side up. It's really important to do that. These are a key resource in the playing of the game. The build action allows you to create more units on the board. The two kinds of units that you have are your fleets and you have star bases. You'll notice the fleet has 3 ships on it. The star base has 5 dots. That reminds you their value in combat. The difference is fleets can move, star bases cannot, unless you have the technology card that lets you move star bases. You need to spend 1 population and 1 matter. Population is the green icon and matter is the red star icon. So I might discard this card for the population and this card for the matter. These two together would buy me 1 fleet. When you build, you have to build them on an inhabitable planet, so one of the green ones, that has a colony marker or your homeworld. There's no limit to how many fleets or star bases you can have on a planet, and there's the only limit to how many you have on the board is you are limited by the number of tokens that you have. Once they're on the board, they're stuck there though, so don't put them in a weird spot because you can't just forfeit them later to get them back. So that's the build action. You're going to spend 1 matter and 1 population to build 1 unit, or 2 of each to build 2 units. You can put those on different planets as long as they have colonies or your homeworld. To move, you're going to spend energy, which is the white star. So like for example, my farthest card has 2 energy on it. For each energy you spend, you may fly 1 fleet, 1 space on the board. So for instance, if red is spending energy, they could fly this fleet from Boldar to Ishtar for 1 energy. You may only enter 1 system on the board, that's the planets, where you do not have control at the beginning of your turn. So if I want to fly to Ishtar, I cannot also fly to Pelgriv, because I don't have, at the beginning of my turn, I don't have control of either of those if I'm red. I can go to one or the other, not both. You can move your ships around as much as you want within your friendly places where you already have control, but within the action, you can only go into one place you don't control. So that's the movement. You do all that movement first, and then you go into combat. So first thing I do is move, and I can move as many of my ships in there as I want, and I have points to do. Let's say that I have 2 points, and so I'm going to move in 2 matter and spend 1 matter here. So I can spend 1 matter to move this fleet and 2 matter to move this fleet, 1, 2. There's my 3 matter I've discarded, and I now have 2 fleets on this planet with an alien planet. Let's say that's all the movement I want to do. Now we go to combat. First thing I do is I add up my attack strength. My attack strength is 6th. Let's say I don't have any other cards in play, but there are cards I might have in my reserve that would give me extra. You have to bring all that into account. But let's say my attack is 6. I take, over on the left side of the board, I take this marker and I slide it up to 6 on the red side, which is for attack. It has nothing to do with my color. If you're the attacker, you put yours on red. Now we look at what is the defense. When you're attacking an uninhabited alien world, where there's not another player, you look at the little defense icon in the corner. That's a 2. So immediately go 1, 2. We slide it down toward the green 2 spots. Then I'm going to look at this alien counter and I'm going to reveal it. It says 3. So we go 1, 2, 3. Now that means that after I invade, they have put up a defense of 5 and I brought in a strength of 6. So that means I win the combat and it's over, and we'll talk about the resolution later. Let's say, however, that instead we had a 5 there. The alien markers go from 1 to 9, so they could be, it's quite a swing. So let's say there was a 5 there instead. That would mean that from my 6, I'm now subtracting 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we're now 1 space into the green side over on the combat track. Now, as the attacker, I have a choice. Because there was an alien token that was hidden, I can retreat. I could choose to retreat now and have no problem. I would get to move my ships back along one link to a planet I control, and we would be fine. Now, if I did not control a planet there, I would not be able to retreat. You have to retreat to a friendly system, one that you control. But I can, so that could be it. We could be done right there. But I'm not going to do that. I have other ways. So if I decide to stay, now the defender has a chance to retreat. Again, that's not going to happen because that's not a player. Right now I'm losing by 2. I have to increase my attack in some way. There's a couple ways to do that. First, I can move a ship into that region. If I had another fleet on Clundo, I could pay another movement to move a ship in, and that would raise my combat by 3. I don't have another ship on Clundo, So I have to look at my cards. I notice in my development track, I have a red matter icon here of a 1. Red matter is one of the things you can use to increase your combat. You spend it. So I would flip this token over to show that I've used it. I haven't really talked about that yet, but we'll get back to it. Let's say I also have the Jork card in my hand. That's got a red one also. So I would discard that. That gives me 2 more points. So I move this up 1, 2. So for each red matter point that you spend, you get to move the attack 1 space in your direction. I've now spent 2. It's back in the red. I win the combat. If you win against an alien planet, all you do is you get rid of the alien token, and then you take control of that planet. Let's say it's the next round up. Let's say that I have an outpost, as the red player, I have an outpost there. Now I want to attack the blue player. So it's my next turn. I would spend 2 movement to move my ships into his planet. Against another player, it works similar. I start by moving this marker up to 6, because I brought in 6. Then the other player moves it back down 3, 1, 2, 3, because they have 1 fleet there. And then we look at where it is. I'm up 3 to 0. I'm up 3 points. Now, as the attacker, I do not have the chance to retreat. That's only when there's an unrevealed alien token to be flipped. That's the only time you get to retreat. As the defender here, my friend blue could retreat. Now, unfortunately, in the game setup we have here, the blue does not have anywhere to retreat to. But if blue had another safe system, let's say blue owned New Earth here, they could, instead of fighting, run away. Now, when they do that, they're abandoning anything that can't move. If they did that, I win the combat. I destroy their outpost that's on there, and that's it. But let's say we have to fight a little bit. So they're down. I'm up 3. They say they're not going to retreat. Now what we do is we look at which side is the combat marker on. If it's in the attacker's zone, then the defender starts. If it's in the defender zone, the attacker starts. But let's say the defender's starting. Let's see what they've got here. So they have 1 matter token. He's going to flip that. That moves it 1 toward them. And it turned out they had some other stuff in their hand. Let's say 2 more matter in their hand. So they move it 1, 2 to 0. Now, a 0 means actually that the defense is winning. If I, as the attacker, was unable to adjust my attack back, they win the combat. Let's say I can adjust back. Maybe I spend 1 more to nudge it back up. We could go back and forth a couple times. Remember, you can use movement points to bring ships in as long as you're not moving through unfriendly territory. You can use matter points to increase your combat score. And then there are also some cards that let you increase your combat score. The only way that you can use those cards, though, is if they say combat on them. There are some other cards that you might think would help you, like there's a card that lets you draw a couple free cards. That's a free action. You can't use that during combat. But let's say we finish and red is up 1 point. I'm the attacker, I'm up 1 point. Now we resolve damage. If you're the winner of the combat, you lose half of your fleet rounded down. So if you have two fleets, you lose 1 of them. If you have 3 fleets, you lose 1 of them. If you have 2 ships and a starbase and you win the combat, you lose 1 unit. You get to pick which one. If you lose the combat, you actually lose half rounded up. So if you have 1 unit, you lose it. If you have 2 units, you lose 1 of them. If you have 3 units, you lose 2 of them. So it's worse for the defender. And then after you've lost those units, you may retreat your other units away. Again, like in this case that we set up here, blue could retreat their remaining unit here. Remember, it has to be to a friendly space. Anything you can't retreat, like this outpost, is destroyed. When you're fighting combat against another player, there's a couple more things that happen. If you lose control of a space of a system, you have a unit on there and you lose it, then you have to forfeit the card. So now blue had control of the Jork card, so they have to go through their deck and find the Jork card, and then they return it to the uninhabitable system deck. There's one more rule I want to mention about attacks, which is if in your first attack, in the first round of combat, the person losing is unable to even bring the counter up to their winning side, the attackers lose nothing in the combat. The next action you could take is colonize. I can colonize a system in 2 ways. First, you could add a cube. You can add a cube or an outpost to any system, inhabitable or uninhabitable. To add a cube, you have to spend 1 population. So I would maybe play this green card or this card with the 1 population on it, Or if you had a development token with a population on it, you could flip that over onto the undeveloped side to spend that one. Then I get to put a cube on there on my outpost. The other way you could do it is if you have an inhabitable system. When you do that, you get to put a colony down. Now a colony gets you a little bit extra. You have to spend 3 of these, not just 1, 3 population, and then you get to put your colony down. When you play your colony, you're going to take it from your player board. You're going to take it off your player board and put it on your planet, which leaves a space open on your player board in the development track. That means you then get to take a development counter from the market and put it on your development track. As we talked about before, the development counters do a variety of things. Whether you're putting an outpost down on either kind of planet, or you put a colony down on an inhabitable planet, either way, you get to take the card for that planet. So if I just put an outpost on Rend, for instance, I would go through and find the Rend card and add that to my discard pile. That gives you more resources, but it also bloats your deck a little bit. The next thing you can do is draft a technology. There are going to be 8 of them on display, and each one has a cost in the corner of research points. In order to buy a technology card, you are going to spend the research points, again, discarding cards that have them. When you take that card, it goes in your discard pile, and then you'll be able to use it later. Then immediately refill the market from the deck. There's one technology where you don't buy the card. The Wormhole technology card allows you to move around the galaxy in a different way. In order to take that card, it has to be available. Once it's available, it's set aside. So the market still has 8 cards, but now there's this Wormhole technology also available. And you just pay 2 movement, and then you get to take a Wormhole development token, and you put it at the end of your player board in the Wormhole spot. That allows you to travel by Wormhole, spending a research point to use to move 2 units through a Wormhole. So the reserve. This is one of the more confusing aspects of the game. It's a little different than most deck builders that you have. So on your player board, you have your draw deck. You're going to have your cards sitting there. You have your discard pile. You're going to have your cards sitting there. And then you also have 2 reserve spots. Reserve 1, reserve 2. The reserve spots count like these are cards you're holding in your hand. They do not count against your hand limit, but they do count. You can play them as though you're holding them. So this allows you to act as though you have a bigger hand by spending some actions to put cards in reserve. Now you can hold 2 cards in each reserve stack. However, reserve 1 can hold any card you want. You put it in there, you put it face up, you can put any card you want in there, up to 2. Reserve 2 is a special reserve card stack only for cards that have the reserve keyword on them. So for instance, this culture card is worth 4 points at the end of the game. It says reserve on it. So in order to get those 4 points, at some point I need to add it to my reserve. Because it says reserve in it, it can go in the right-hand side reserve 2 space. Again, you can have 2 cards in there, and you can have 2 cards in here. Whenever you take the reserve action, you may add cards from your hand to the reserve, and you may move cards back and forth between the reserve, always following the rule that on the right side, you can only put cards that say reserve. If you manage to get one of these reserve +1 development tokens, it goes in your development line on your player board up here. You may now have 3 cards in each of your reserve stacks. So the reserve +1 actually gives you +1 in each side. If you got another one, it would be 4 in each side. You can never take cards out of the reserve back into your hand. Remember, you can play cards out of the reserve as if they're in your hand, but you can't take them out. Remove card from play. If you remove a technology card from play, you take it actually out of the game. You put it in the box. If you remove a planet or a system card from play, it goes back in the system deck. So if someone else conquers that system later, they get to use that card. Or if you lose that system and you conquer it later, you get to get that card back. The next one on here says card action. Again, I mentioned earlier, there are some cards that say action on them. When you play those, that's one of your 2 actions, and that's what that card action means. All right, there's 2 more actions I want to talk about, and they're both pretty simple. The first one is discard cards, and the way that works is just you say, I'm taking the discard cards action, and then you get to take as many cards from your hand or your reserve as you want, put them in the discard pile. Now, you don't draw back up till the end of your turn, so I wouldn't do that as your first action, but you might have some reason to. Finally, you can pass. If you ultimately don't have anything you want to do, you could use one action you could take is pass, and then your turn is ended and you draw back up. If you need to shuffle, you move the shuffle marker, and so on. Well, that's it. I think that I've explained everything you need to know in order to play a handful of stars. Remember that the game ends when the shuffle track on the right-hand side reaches the red box, and then you finish the round and do one more round of players' turns, and then the game is over. At that time, you're going to add up all the points that you have on the board. So you get 7 points for your homeworld, 5 points for your colony, 3 points for your outposts. Add up all those points, add up any points for development tokens that you have in your development line, and any points for cards that you've managed to get into your reserve. Again, if it's in your deck, not worth anything. That determines who wins. If there's a tie, the player that controls the most system wins, and after that, players share in the victory. So that's a handful of stars. I hope that this video has been helpful to you. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them in the comments below the video, or you could check out on Board Game Geek. There's a fairly robust set of threads about the game. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.